Welcome aboard, everybody. It looks like we've got a really sizable audience, which is fantastic. Um, I'm Tom Harris, founder of Jetée Press, and um, wanted to open up with talking about the name of Jetée Press itself. I've had people kind of have problems pronouncing it and what does it mean and um, basically it's kind of a confluence of two things I'm passionate about, which is film and aviation. And there was a French film in 1962 called La Jetée, and it's centered around the observation deck at Orly Airport. And that observation deck was called the Jetty, which translates into La Jetée. And I just always found photographs from that era just quintessentially, jet age Europe, which I just love so much. Anyways, I would like to introduce we are partnering up with Avgeekery, which is an amazing endeavor. It is they've been working for so many years to build up a dedicated audience, and they're a wonderful place to get news and to just geek out, if you will. Jeff is the guy who founded Avgeekery, and I'd like to pass things off to Jeff.
Hey, what's up, Tom? Well, first of all, great to be here and be part of this effort. This is our first live and also our first joint live between Jetée Press and Avgeekery. As you mentioned, I'm the founder of Avgeekery. I started this crazy site back in 2014. I felt like we needed a home for avgeeks, and back in the day, it wasn't as popular of a term. We were kind of ostracized by most of society, but now we're cool. We've made it, right? So we were founded in 2014. We had a vision to share the love of aviation with others on our website and also through social media. There's what I learned, and part of the reason I wanted to start this was that there are so many untold and little known stories in aviation that really inspire us, affect us, and influence the world around us, because aviation is so core to modern society. So we seek to share not only the normal news that happens, but also unique and impactful news and historical analysis from our team of professionals that include aviators, people in the industry, as well as those who are really dedicated and professional avgeeks, like I'd consider all of us here today. We also have some authors, including Brian, who's one of our contributors, and we're excited to be here. Our goal is really just to share that love of aviation with others. So I think that's what we're going to do over the next hour, as well as give away a bunch of free stuff too. And if you stick around, a discount code for Brian's awesome book. So I'm handing it back to you, Tom.
Yes, and the trivia prizes are. Let's see. I order way too many diecast airplanes, and sometimes I forget that I ordered a plane during the day sober, and then I ordered the same plane at night with a little too much tequila going on. So my recreational drinking is your benefit. We have a in-flight 200 scale 767 Iceland Air, lovely, and then we've got we got this little beauty. I got two of these. I got a Herpa Skylink Guppy. So those will be the two prizes on today's episode. Let's see. We'll hand it off to Joseph Santiago. JP and I have known each other for going on about 21 years, 22 years. And it is so amazing to be partnering with him in this endeavor. He is co-owner, if you will, along with French artist Gael Eligouet, which we will hopefully have him on a show on a forum real soon. Anyways, handing it off to JP.
Hello, everyone. I'm JP Santiago. I am the other half of Jetée Press. A lot of what you see in our social media content throughout the day that appears on our page and our Instagram stream is stuff that I've been working on for the last several weeks coming up. So I would encourage all of you to be sure to follow Jetée Press on our Facebook page as well as our Instagram stream, where we will have that content pushed out once in the morning and once in the afternoon, and it will cover all aspects of aviation history. You name it, we're going to touch on it. Tom has passionately believed that there are so many stories in aviation that have yet to be told and yet to be enjoyed. And one of the reasons he brought me in is because he knows that I am very passionate about telling stories that aren't just of interest to avgeeks, but also in people who don't know a thing about aviation. And so there are going to be things in our social media content that you'll probably want to share with your friends. It may be something about your own airport you didn't know, or a favorite airline, or a family member who worked for an airline or flew a particular plane that you may want to share with your friends and families. And we certainly do encourage you to do that. So what I'd like to do is just kind of kick off here. I'd like to welcome Brian Wiklem back. He is the author of Fighting to be Heard, How the British Aerospace 146 Started the Regional Jet Revolution. I want to thank Brian for coming back a second time for doing this. The first show we did on July 31st, and Brian was kind enough to allow us to ambush him a second time. Brian, before we get into the questions and the discussion, let's lead off and just have everyone tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what brought you into the world of aviation.
Oh, that's a very long story. I don't think we have enough time for that. But long story short, my grandmother had a home under the southern runways at LAX, and literally was a mile from the final approach. And so we'd see the planes fly over. Thought we could throw rocks at them, and that's how I fell in love with aviation, because I would see all these airlines in different colors, Braniff and Western and PSA and Pan Am, et cetera, and so that's kind of how I fell in love with aviation. I missed my calling as a commercial pilot because the Air Force and the Navy thought I was, one of the Top Gun people that wanted to fly fighter jets, and I wasn't smart enough at the time to say, no, I want to fly cargo jets or cargo planes so I could transition into airline service. So I kept my love of aviation alive, went into a different field, and, in the process have made a couple documentaries in the aviation space, and just finished writing my first aviation book. So here we are.
Well, great. So one of the things I want to make sure that everybody knows is that at the second half of our broadcast, we will be taking questions that we'll be giving Brian regarding the BAE 146 and this book. So certainly I would encourage you all to use the comments function on the site to submit those comments so that the Jetée team can kind of go through those. So go ahead and start thinking about your questions over the course of our discussion here with Brian. So, Brian, the first question I want to know is that, I've got your book. It is an impressive volume, and at 12 pounds and 500 pages, I don't think there's anything in there that is not covered about the BAE 146. In the course of your years of research and working on the book, what's the one thing you really learned about yourself as an author and as an aviation geek in writing this book?
Great question. I love aviation. I love books. I have quite a few of them. And what I had learned is that I wanted to tell a story, obviously a nonfiction story. I didn't want to just do a book that had boring facts and figures, how many were built, how was it conceived, who flew it, how many crashes were there, all that same stuff. I wanted to actually get down into the nitty gritty that I feel like at least commercial aviation books tend to overlook. I feel like talking to the customers who bought the aircraft and the people who maintained it, and the people who flew it, and the people who worked on the ground, etc. I kind of feel like a lot of that gets lost, and when you're talking about a specific aircraft, it's, hey, how do they sell this thing? What's the process there? So I try to kind of take a holistic view of all of these things that I wanted to know, and decided to do a deep dive. And that's kind of why we're at 500 pages. And I did trim 80, but it was
a pretty deep dive.
Pictures. Yeah, it's a really deep dive. We were at the bottom of the Mariana Canyon or whatever that is in the Pacific.
Yep.
But I wanted to kind of cover all the aspects and then weave it into a story so that, it was like reading a movie or a movie script. Well,
great. In all of your research work and writing for the book, what was the most fun about it? What was it? An airline, particular people you talk with? What part of this process really brought the aircraft to life for you?
The people by far. Talking to the people that worked both in the early and the latter days of British Aerospace involvement in a regional jetliner. I think probably some of the most fun people I had talking to were those that were with British Aerospace in the 146 in the early days on the manufacturing side, who were then sent to airlines as customer support reps, and then eventually left British Aerospace and joined the airlines. And, they've just got lots of stories from both ends, as the manufacturer and also as the customer operating it after the fact. Those to me were by far and away the most interesting people to talk to. And I feel like they helped bring everything to life. Like specifically Chapter 5, PSA, I had talked to 3 of the reps who had come over, including one who eventually left PSA and then went to AirCal, who, because they had just taken the 146 as well. And by far and away, that was the coolest aspect of doing this book and the people I had talked to.
Hey, so Ryan, one of the things that when you think about this book, there's probably a number of people on this forum who are watching us live who are just huge fans of the 146. That's all they can think about. They wish it was still flying regularly with all the different airlines. But there's also probably some people who are joining us who really don't know that much about this airplane, and don't know much about the background or why this is such a unique aircraft. And obviously you have a passion for it. You wrote a 12-pound book. So do you mind just sharing a little bit of an overview of what is this plane? What is a BA 146? Not a 146, a 146.
Yeah. So the summary of the 146 is, and it's also nice to have this validated by people who worked at the manufacturer who have almost the same viewpoint. And for me, it's the most over-designed and overbuilt aircraft that no airline needed. With the British
Flying tank.
Yeah, what the British Aerospace guys will say is it's a brick shit house. So, excuse my French, but it was designed for operational capabilities that, again, most airlines didn't need. Most airlines weren't operating into unpaved airfields. Most airlines weren't in a situation where they needed, to get into an airport like London City or, Aspen. It's just like it's like a handful of airports where you need the steep, dive and climb capability. Selling 4 engines because it's better than 3 or 2. That only went so far. And what a lot of people don't realize is that the aircraft, excuse me, was designed originally to sell to state-owned airlines in arguably third world countries, Africa and Southeast Asia, etc., so that they could have a jet aircraft that could perform in unpaved fields and, all those typical operations. What British Aerospace failed to take into account was the market was changing. We had the oil crisis, which that more or less sank the aircraft initially. And their target customer, they didn't buy new aircraft. They bought used aircraft, often not even secondhand, more like third and fourth hand aircraft. And when they did, they only would buy 1 or 2. And so sorry, I had bad allergies today. I apologize for the throat clearing. the aircraft had to basically go through an evolutionary process in selling and presenting it to established carriers because they didn't need that functionality. And so, not much had changed with the design of the aircraft, but it just caused the sales and marketing organization to reconfigure how they were going to present what they had to airlines that were, potentially on the block for buying new aircraft.
Well, one of the things that we've kind of noticed in our social media content talking about the 146 is that there's quite a bit of misconceptions out there. And we talked a little bit about this, Brian, at the last show we did on July 31st. I wonder if you could just address kind of that misconception about the 146 being an uneconomical aircraft that was bad for the airlines. I know that kind of segues a little bit into what you've kind of already described, but I wonder if you could kind of like talk a little bit about that misconception that this was a poorly designed aircraft that shouldn't have been in the airline service.
Yes. So obviously every aircraft goes through a gestation period, and the 146 was certainly no different. And in the early days, it certainly did get a bad rap, and deservedly so. Not necessarily because of British Aerospace. People tend to look at the British Aerospace 146 and go, it's a British aircraft. They don't build like Boeing or McDonnell Douglas and stuff. But arguably, the most consistent problem in the early days of the 146 had nothing to do with British aviation. It was the American designed engines that they had to go to, because Rolls-Royce could not deliver an engine to Hawker Siddeley or subsequently British Aerospace at the time, because they were dealing with all the problems with the Olympus engines with Concorde and the TriStar engine. The whole thing was they were already stretched too thin. And so Avco Lycoming came into play because they had a suitable engine that could work, but this was an engine that arguably was used in tanks and helicopters and wasn't designed for airline operations. And so a lot of people look at the early days of the 146 and those who had worked with carriers with the 146 as, it's a junk airplane, et cetera, et cetera. And it just went through a lot of teething problems with, especially Avco Lycoming, who had no real, understanding of the airline market. And British Aerospace probably thought, this engine's probably more reliable than we think it is. But it just went through a lot of growing pains. And, the other argument was that the aircraft sank a lot of airlines. That too was not true, but it certainly didn't help some of those airlines. Specifically, the aircraft was really slow to sell in the early days, with the exception of PSA. And so the sales team at British Aerospace was trying to do anything and everything they could to sell the aircraft. And subsequently, and documented in the book, that basically just about sank British Aerospace. As I like to call it, the chickens came home to roost. They did a lot of questionable deals with airlines that really didn't have the capital to run and sustain an airline. And so the 146 just basically brought to fruition what was going to eventually happen with those airlines anyway, had they not chosen those aircraft. They were not well-funded airlines. And so after the evolution of, restructuring the company and the customers that they were targeting and overhauling, the problems that were perceived with the aircraft, the aircraft went on to serve a number of airlines for not just, 2 or 3 years, but, decades, 10, 20 years. I mean, CityJet's a good example. Crossair's another one, Swiss, Sabina, I could go on. And now these aircraft have found a new market as air tankers. So, an aircraft that is junk subsequently doesn't last long. It gets grounded, it gets removed from service, people stop buying it. But I just think it took a number of years for British Aerospace and Avco to sort some of the early problems. But once they did, the aircraft performed as needed and, performed in a way that other aircraft couldn't.
Great. So, Tom, I believe you want to ask a question to Brian.
Oh, yeah. So with the BAE 146, Are there still?
Just so you guys know, there's a whole chat going on of, is this a 146 or a 146 or 146? So maybe Brian, you can.
It's the 146, just like it's the Boeing 747 and the 767, not the 767.
You know, you guys ruined my whole.
Oh no! Go ask
you just go. No, it's too late now. Move on, JP.
Because of that very reason. And I quiet. Andy, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Andy. We love you, buddy.
Yeah. So Yuri, we answered your question. Just for everyone else in the audience, if you have a question, feel free to ask in the comments. We have a number of questions we want to ask Brian and kind of talk about the airplane in various ways, but also really want to get to your questions if you have anything too.
Okay, so Tom, you going to ask the question? Or?
No, actually, no. I was just messing around.
Okay.
Definitely looking for questions from. The one thing I do want to say is with the forum, part of our kind of core values with the forum, the Jetée Avgeekery forum, is that there's no dumb questions. Okay. We really hate when people kind of weaponize other people's lack of knowledge about something. Being a white male know-it-all, I'm constantly learning new things every day, and especially about aviation. And I know it's surprising to think, but JP actually on occasion will find out something new. So please, there are no dumb questions. We want this to be inclusive and fun. So, we want to be accessible. We don't want to try to create like a hierarchical element. It's not a contest.
We're good.
What's that?
It's just an aviation forum. We're good. Everyone's.
It's just and so please send us questions. We would love to hear from you guys.
JP, it looks like you have another question. And Brian, we're excited to hear more about the airplane.
So one of the things that we'd like to ask you, Brian, we know that the Royal Air Force was an early operator of the 146. They got I think the RAF got their planes before Dan Air did, who was one of the launch customers. But that the 146 was also involved in the transportation of the royal family. And I know that from your research and reading your book that several members of the royal family actually flew the 146. Could you kind of tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's correct. And so Prince Philip was the first one to get his conversion training and licensing as a pilot for the 146, and he flew it regularly. In fact, he flew the prototype aircraft when it was in Japan doing a tour with potential airline customers. Granted, he hadn't gone through conversion training at the time, but he was a licensed pilot. And then later on, Prince Charles also went through training and had flown the aircraft. Often when he was traveling somewhere, he would fly on the flight deck under supervision with one of the Air Force squadron leaders. And so, but he unfortunately had a landing accident, and the plane was nearly written off. It wasn't, thank God, and nobody was hurt. Even better. But after that, not only did he retire from flying, but it's my understanding that none of the royal family were going to be sitting up front and flying the aircraft anymore. So.
All right, so it looks like we've kind of got some questions starting to come in, Brian. So why don't we go ahead and let's start taking some audience questions. The first question here comes from John. He would like to know, why do you think the QC version never gained any sales?
So that's a great question, and one that I don't necessarily feel like I have an answer for, because obviously I can't get in the heads of every airline, and I tried to, but not everybody was very forthcoming. I suspect it just had to do with capacity of the aircraft and cost. Anybody, if you've ever done any kind of research into how airlines operate, every time you add a different type of aircraft to the fleet, your costs go way up. And it's not just because you bought the plane. There's the crew that has to train on it, all those spare parts you need, et cetera, et cetera. And I suspect that although the 146 found a niche with flying cargo at night, especially in noise-sensitive airports, there just weren't enough noise-sensitive airports, not to mention the lack of range that the aircraft had versus, say, you know, a Boeing 727 or 737 or a Douglas DC-8. So that's why I suspect it never caught on. I mean, TNT arguably was the largest QC operator, and it worked within the European network because a lot of the European airports have, you know, noise sensitivity. But it just, I mean, that's what I would speculate as to why it wasn't more successful.
Okay, great. Well, our next question comes from Richard. I would like to say that he did put in the chat, amazing book, which I only received yesterday. Thank you, Richard, for those comments. But he would like, he's asking, what changed with the RJ series to make it more popular with the airlines? So we know that there was a name change or a rebranding of the aircraft from the BAE 146, just for Andy's benefit.
Got it right.
To the RJ series. So we had the RJ70, the RJ85, and so on and so forth. So Richard is asking, what changed about the RJ that made it more popular?
Well, it went through two changes. So I'll get through the technical aspects. I mean, obviously there were minor improvements to the aircraft. Most of the changes were to the engines. It gained digital flight controls, engine controls for better fuel and performance handling. It did start to receive glass cockpit updates, but otherwise it's arguably the same planes, same fuselage, same landing gear, everything else is the same. Where it started to become more popular and more of a serious contender in the RJ space is when I look at an RJ or a 146, it'll always be a 146 to me, just because that's what it started out as. But a lot of airlines, the 146 in their earlier days obviously had a lot of performance and reliability issues. And so when British Aerospace was basically nearing bankruptcy, to clean the slate, one of the things that they wanted to do with the introduction of the improved aircraft was to rebrand it completely and move production up to Woodford. And so they went back to one of the conglomerate names, which was Avro. And a lot of airlines arguably didn't look at the aircraft and go, that's just a 146. A lot of the executives went, oh, that's a different aircraft altogether. We're geeks. We know it's bullshit, but the airlines bought into it. And that helped put them on the books. And also, too, when they went through this transition, they started to target their customers very differently. So in the early days, it was do whatever you can to get a sale and get that aircraft out the door. But then all those airlines that had collapsed financially basically just about screwed British Aerospace out of business. And Richard, as you read the book, you'll discover that. So then it became the sales overhaul with, we're going to focus on AAA customers. And here's how we define AAA customers, financially sound, established, blah, blah, blah. And they came up with a bunch of categories for customers. And the bottom 2 or 3 categories we're not going to deal with at all. We're going to go sell to the top tier customers. And that's where Mesaba, who was operating on behalf of Northwest, Sabina, Crossair, all these newer Lufthansa, all these new carriers were marquee players for the Avro series, and obviously they found a niche for the aircraft in their route networks. But that's kind of the difference, and that's kind of why it was rebranded to something else, is to kind of hide the sins of the past, so to speak.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So Brian, you've mentioned this airplane was way overbuilt, right? Probably could last until 2100, just how well it was constructed and
yes,
made to last. At the same time, there were tons of features that were not necessary to sell an airplane for the market that they were trying to sell into. I just have to ask you, what's probably one of the features that you think is just totally unnecessary that they included that is just a real head scratcher of why they included it.
So you're asking an AvGeek to define the performance, the technical performance and operational aspects.
No, just like one feature that you're like, this is crazy. It was totally unnecessary.
But yeah, no, I totally hear you. You know, honestly, I don't have a good answer for that, but I'm going to throw one out anyway. So one of the biggest things is it has no thrust reversers. Instead, you have the pedal brake in the back, and you have these massive, you know, which were originally steel brakes that became carbon brakes to stop the aircraft, and then obviously the flaps or the spoilers. And the result is, you know, this is a regional jet. You're trying to turn it quickly, but the brakes, if they're really hot, take time to cool down, and you're not going to turn around and take off. And so I know a lot of the aircraft that were turned around very quickly, there was an option for fans to be installed over the main gear brakes to cool them down. I don't think many customers took that up, but you know, that's just one of the arguments. And British Aerospace used that to their advantage to some degree of, hey, we have a quiet airplane. You don't need thrust reversers, but never mind the fact that you're going to put a hell of a lot more wear and tear on the brakes and everything else. So, you know, again, I don't maintain the aircraft, and somebody else could certainly speak more with more knowledge than I could on that.
Yeah. We have a question too from the audience. So Yuri had asked the question, how many 146s are still flying beyond the USA?
I should know this answer, and I should have my own ass kicked for not knowing it. There's a gentleman out there that actually maintains a list of every aircraft ever built, what happened to it, and who it's flying for now. So as far as 146 still flying outside the U.S., there's a charter operator. There's two charter operators in Canada still flying it, North Caribou and Summit, from a passenger perspective. I believe there's a few aircraft in some Eastern European countries that are still operating it. But outside of that, if you want to fly on the 146 as a passenger, your best bet is to fly to South America and fly DAP out of Chile. They're still flying passenger aircraft on their routes. So. Nice. I don't know. I think it's probably, I don't think there's any more than about 30 passenger aircraft globally that are still flying.
And the majority of 146 operations here in the United States are primarily firefighting aircraft, primarily with Conair Aeroflight as well as Neptune Aviation. I believe Tom has got the next question that he wants to ask you.
Well, let's see. Terry McDonald has a question. I'll just read it verbatim. Canada needed a niche to fit small takeoff and landing capability for rural routes. Let's see here. That were best suited for northern Canada and more freight capability and longer range, and cost effective. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I don't know what Terry's asking me. Somebody want to pick this up?
I think he's not asking a question. He's just pointing out why.
Oh yeah, no, it looked like a question at first, and then I suddenly went right into the hay bales on that one. Sorry, well, Terry. Thanks for the info.
Yeah. It does bring up an interesting question, though, that we did talk a little bit about rough field ops. We've had a few posts in our social media content about in Australia flying these into mining strips. We know that the first rough field operator, though, was AirPac. And so I wonder if, Brian, you could tell us a little bit about just what did that plane look like when it came back from AirPac after AirPac was done with it? Because AirPac
particularly landing on gravel runways, right?
Yeah, they didn't really have much of a unpaved field kit, and so one of the people that I had talked to worked for the company that refurbished the aircraft after it left AirPac, and just said that, you know, excuse my vulgarity and profanity, but the underside of the aircraft was beat to shit from all of the rocks that were kicked up from the wheels and stuff.
Yeah.
But going back real quick to what Terry McDonald had asked, the irony is, like London City, British Aerospace was working with the Toronto Harbour Commission to try to get operations with the jet into the city airport, and was unsuccessful. I know that the ban on jets there was extended until 2033, but who knows?
Well,
I'm sorry. I have a quick question for myself. The engines on the 146 look like RB 211s, basically small ones. Is that a product of Rolls-Royce starting the program, and then those were actually Rolls-Royce cowlings or housings, and then how did that all take place?
Yeah, Rolls-Royce never did anything for the aircraft. So the housings were because each engine housed either a hydraulic or an electric pump, and so there's a bulge underneath that was supposed to make it easy to open up the engine and service it while it was on the wing. And each aircraft, I believe it was the number 2 and number 3 engine would have the hydraulic pump, and the number 1 and number 4 engine would have the electrical pumps. And it was, in case one went bad, there was a backup of some sorts. But the bare metal and the shape that makes it look like an RB211 is just pure coincidence.
Well, we had an interesting observation on our social media feed that there was actually a Mongolian airline that operated 2 146s recently on mining charters in Mongolia, but they had actually worked with British Aerospace on a rubberized under fuselage coating that came from the rally racing world to protect the fuselage of that 146, which was completely news to me, which I thought was really fascinating. So I'm blanking out on the person who posted that onto our feed, but I guarantee you that's probably going to become a post in our social media content. So whoever did post that to our feed, I want to thank you for that observation. I find it really fascinating. Another question that we want to ask, Brian, is that we know that PSA was really the big operator of the 146 in the United States. I wonder if you could just comment a little bit about AirCal, who was PSA's big competitor in the West Coast, also operating the 146.
Yeah, so I go over this in detail in chapter 5 and subsequently chapter 6. And I only say this because anybody who's wondering, hey, are these questions answers? Like, oh yeah, no, I at least I hope I did research. PSA bought the 146. They were looking to either go bigger or smaller. And they decided they wanted to go smaller, and they wanted to try to expand into other West Coast airports that wouldn't necessarily support a Boeing or a McDonnell Douglas aircraft. And so they liked the 146. They saw it at, I believe it was Farnborough, and they liked how quiet it was and everything. And so they did all their due diligence. Long story short, they bought a bunch of aircraft, brought it to John Wayne Airport specifically, which was AirCal's home base. And because the aircraft didn't register, so John Wayne Airport has a series of noise measuring equipment, and any aircraft that violates those noise parameters is hit with financial penalties, followed by ultimately revoking their slots. And it is a slot constrained airport, not because of capacity per se, but because there's only so many aircraft movements allowed due to the county requirements. And basically a bunch of whiny citizens who bought right next to an airport and then whine and complain that it's too noisy. And trust me, I lived right next to John Wayne Airport before I moved a couple years ago. And every argument you've ever heard about John Wayne Airport turns out to be complete and utter bullshit. Property values there couldn't be higher. It's not noisy. And, that's a whole nother subject that I'm not going to bore people with. That being said, PSA's aircraft technically qualified for unlimited movements, whereas other operators using DC-9 or 737 aircraft, because of the noise parameters in place, they could only they had limited slots, and so AirCal and the airport kind of threw up a fit about it because the airport felt they weren't set up for unlimited flights, and AirCal kind of bitched because gave their competitor an unfair advantage. And so AirCal had at the time was going to be one of the early customers for Boeing 737-300, and the aircraft was going to have to depart John Wayne with capacity restrictions because of the noise parameters. And so with PSA kind of having the early edge, and there was a bunch of legal battles and stuff, AirCal had bought 6 aircraft just to thwart PSA. But because they didn't have a big fleet, they had some operational issues with it. Ironically, the president of AirCal, David Banmiller, worked with Boeing and subsequently the FAA. And even before they worked with Boeing, they were trying to come up with ways to defeat the noise sensors and still take off without capacity restraints. And arguably, the deep cutback is what's in place at John Wayne Airport, where you take off at full power and then you power back and it's quiet for a little bit. AirCal actually developed that, and Boeing, according to David Banmiller, neither Boeing nor the FAA thought it could work, but with some tweaking and stuff, that's the operation in play there, and that was only developed because of the British Aerospace 146 having such quiet performance. So I've probably gone on way too long about that. But
no, that's really interesting. It's funny too that engines are so much quieter today, and yet you still have to do that pullback. So just want to give a heads up. We have about 15 more minutes here. We have time for about 2 more questions. And then at the same time, we also still have our trivia. So if you're hanging on for some pretty great prizes, keep hanging on. We got some very interesting questions. It's an opportunity for the audience to answer a question and win a prize. So with that, I'll hand it back to JP for the next question. And then I have I'll keep looking at the chat to see if they have one. If not, I have one more for you, Brian. Oh,
okay. There's my. Can you hear me now? Okay.
There you go.
So one of the things that came to mind when I was reading your book on the 146 is that it was really kind of designed for kind of like multiple short hops in a day, and I noticed that Hawaiian Airlines actually had an MOU signed or a letter of intent signed to operate the 146 on inter-island services in Hawaii. What happened to that? Did they just, I mean, we know it wasn't because Hawaiian went out of business. They're still flying today, but it seems like the 146 would have been a very natural fit for inter-island services in Hawaii.
I couldn't agree with you more. And again, I don't run an airline. Yeah, I thought the shocking thing with that is they went through all the motions, then had a formal signing ceremony, and they signed for 8 aircraft, and they were due to receive the very first aircraft 6 months from that date. And I can't find anybody at British Aerospace. I can't find any documents. I can't find anybody at Hawaiian that can tell me what happened. And the only thing I can suspect, and I'm just extrapolating this, and then if I can be so blunt, everybody's used to it anyway. I'm pulling this part out of my ass, but I suspect at the time McDonnell Douglas was operating not just DC-9. I'm not McDonnell Douglas. Hawaiian Airlines was operating DC-9s. They were also operating some MD-80s, I believe, at the time. And I don't think the MD-80s were working, and I think that's part of the reason they went to to British Aerospace to find a replacement. And they did return the MD-80s pretty quickly after getting them. I suspect McDonnell Douglas didn't want to lose their business, especially to British Aerospace. And so I'm taking a guess here that they probably talked them into, hey, we'll build you a new aircraft for Inter-Island. And arguably, I think that's where the whole MD-95, the 717 kind of came into play. Granted, it was still, I believe, my timing could be completely wrong on this. It was way off, but the other thing too is, hey, do they want to operate a different aircraft type, or do just stick with DC-9s and just, ride it out until newer aircraft are available? That's kind of what I speculate, but honestly, I have no clue. Ironically, David Bandmiller, who's the president of AirCal, later in the late 90s, 2000s, joined Aloha to kind of rescue them from bankruptcy. And they were actually talking to British Aerospace about the next generation, which was the Avro RJX that, only a few aircraft were built and it was never delivered to an airline customer. They were talking to them about an order for somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 aircraft in a QC combination, so they could fly passengers during the day and fly freight at night, which would have been perfect, for noise considerations. But it was my understanding British Aerospace didn't want to deal with trying to get the passenger aircraft certified and also engage and embark and spend the money to do a QC aircraft too. Kind of silly at the time, given that nobody was buying the RJX. So anyway.
We'll take one. Thank you, Brian. We'll take one more question from the audience, and then we'll move into the trivia section of today's broadcast. This question comes from Richard, and I suspect, and he also suspects in his question, that it's probably a complicated answer, but he asks, did British Aerospace make money on the 146 RJ, or was it more complicated, perhaps more aftermarket support, spares, or financing? Was it profitable for British Aerospace at the end of the day?
I believe the answer is no. It was not profitable, and something as an av geek that I won't say I fully understand or comprehend, but became kind of an eye-opening moment when I researched this book, is that the manufacturer can't necessarily just say tomorrow, we're stopping production of this aircraft. That's it. Go deal with it. They have to maintain the air operating certificate for so many years with spare parts, etc. I suspect in the latter years, obviously it was a profitable venture for British Aerospace, but it didn't make up for the previous year. So once they transitioned to Avro, I believe it was a profitable venture, but it didn't make up for the initial 10 to 12 years and all the heartache and pain that they had gone through with it. So it was kind of a wash every step of the way, in the 80s and even in the 90s. And then finally they got their wish with 9/11. British Aerospace was always trying to find a way out. They wanted to be a part supplier in the Airbus programs. They wanted to get out of building and supporting their aircraft. And so, obviously, if you're making money, why would you leave that business? But I think every iteration was also kick the can down the road. Well, let's keep it going a little bit longer, and hopefully we'll make something to pay back everything that we've done. But that's my take on it.
It was like a dream that failed to die.
Correct.
All right. So we have about 10 minutes left. Love to make sure that we hand out some of the prizes and also have some good trivia time questions. Tom, did you want to take the trivia, or JP, is this your trivia question?
I'll go ahead. I have the questions pulled up here. I'll go ahead and ask it. But if you guys
before you do, real quick, Richard, TNT backed out on most of their orders, and you'll read it. Sorry, so, it's bugging me. I had to answer it.
I know you showed the models and what we're giving away, but you only showed it for just like a split second. Do you mind?
Well, okay. So one of the prizes is an in-flight 767-300 Iceland Air that I was about to send back, but I'll give it away. And then the other one is and I have mine right here. It's oh good Lord.
Oh man,
it's a super guppy that wants to be an L-1011 and a fat guy with a beard all at the same time. Anyways, it's a 200 scale Super Guppy from Herpa. It's actually a kick-ass mold. I got it last week. It's beautiful. Highly recommend it. And so that's the other prize.
That's
so JP, I'll hand that over to you.
All right. Pat Sajak / JP. It's time for the question.
All right. So this will be for the Iceland Air 1/200 scale, Boeing 767-300. The question, and then go ahead and put your answer into the comments section, and we'll be scanning it to figure out who gets it first and who'll get it right first. We all know that Pan American flew the first 747 revenue services, JFK to London Heathrow, on 22 January 1970. So those are the first passenger 747 services in the world. But what I want to know for this question is, which airline inaugurated the second 747 passenger services, and what was the routing? What was the city pair on those inaugural services? So we'll see if we can keep Tom from humming the Jeopardy theme while you guys go ahead and submit your answers to that question. So I am looking for the second revenue 747 services after Pan American launched theirs, and for the airline who launched the second services, what was the city pair involved?
I mean, we're still waiting for people to type. That's a lot to type just for one question.
Well, all they have to do is just give me the airline and just name 2 cities.
That's not too bad. Hey, Brian, while we're waiting for people to write back, question for you is, the Jet obviously kind of had a mixed record and wasn't a huge success, even though it was beloved by many people. But what was how did this just totally change the industry, and especially commercial aviation industry within Britain?
I would certainly argue it showed that, you look at a company like Air Wisconsin, who was operating props, and regional airlines at the time either operated secondhand aircraft or props, because jets were very loud, noisy, and expensive. It opened up the market for smaller carriers to join the jet age, so to speak. Air Wisconsin, they bought 146s brand new. They were the launch customer for the 200 and the 300, and they operated them all the way to the very end. They finally got rid of them when, my timing could be off, but 2006, when they signed a partnership agreement with U.S. Air. They were leaving United and joining U.S. Air. U.S. Air had a stipulation that they could not operate, Air Wisconsin could not operate any aircraft that U.S. Air had previously operated, and the 146 fell right in there. So at that point, they're like, it's time to say goodbye to the 146. And they'd had them for, almost 20 plus years. So it just opened up the market, and, we used to always think of, short hops being in turboprops, and now it's jets.
Yeah.
Even Alaska's getting rid of their Q400s pretty soon. So, and I think that's, probably the last major that's operating turboprops.
Yep.
So we've got a few answers coming in now. Remember, we are looking for the airline and the city pair involved. The first answer, BOAC, London to New York, is not correct. So we'll let you keep trying it. I think some of you are coming close.
Actually, a really, really interesting story about the BOAC 747 was they took delivery of them pretty quickly right after Pan Am, but they sat at Heathrow for 1 or 2 years, JP. There was a pilot strike, and I think the first passenger flight was some kind of employee family day that they just loaded it up with family members, and they flew around Heathrow for a while. Like, I think that was like the first revenue service, with civilians on it. But yeah, they had 3 or 4 747 136s just sitting at Heathrow, and I think it was for at least a year.
Interesting. Yeah. So it looks like we got one correct answer here. Looks like Andy Martin Despite all the flack that we sometimes have gotten over the years from Andy, he did get the correct answer. The second passenger 747 revenue services were launched by Transworld Airlines, JFK to LAX. That was on 25th of February, 1970. You probably remember some of the ads of the TWA's Ambassador service. That's what they called their first class services. And obviously on the Ambassador class on TWA 747s was only two, and two. So 6 seats across in a 747.
Whoa.
Ambassador class on TWA's domestic JFK LAX. So Andy, go ahead. And
Andy, pick the model. Which one do you want? Guppy or in-flight 767?
I just have to joke. I'm pretty sure now they put 6 across in an Embraer. So
Yeah. All right, so let's go on and let's move to our second trivia question.
Yeah,
right.
Andy, it just so we're tracking here, just feel free to post below what model you want.
Yeah, I need to know now before the second. Oh, Guppy without the Guppy is off the table, ladies and gentlemen. All right, good choice.
Oh, our second trivia question here. All right, so only 3 airlines operated the Lockheed L-1649 Starliner brand new. All other operators of the Starliner were secondhand. Name 2 of the 3 airlines that operated the Lockheed Starliner brand new. So we're looking for 2 of the 3 airline operators that operated the Lockheed Starliner brand new. It was really the ultimate piston engine airliner. As a point of trivia, of all the prop liners of that era.
DC-7C was the ultimate. I'm sorry.
Well, it depends upon who you ask.
We only got 3 minutes to start some massive debate, so let's save that.
Of the prop liner era, though, the Starliner did have the highest aspect ratio wing, which allowed it to have a range have its certain performance advantages against its main competitor, which was the DC-7C or the 7Cs. So, all right. So Terry McDonald, you are. Hold on. No, not quite, Terry.
Oh, I wish that would have been awesome.
That would have been an awesome choice, Terry. But
yes. Come on. This one's too easy.
Oh, well, we got Andy's got it.
Oh,
come on. Andy has taken the guppy off the table, so
you know what? It makes postage easier for me.
Yeah,
so
you save shipping that way, but
save shipping that way.
Donate it to somebody else if you want.
All right, so we're gonna call this one for Andy.
Wait. Let's count down 30 seconds. We're gonna give everybody 30 more seconds to come up with the correct answer. If not, Andy Martin gets the second prize.
And we only do this because we all know Andy over the years. So,
yeah. Andy takes great pub photographs, by the way. His Instagram is legendary for British pub photography.
That's awesome. All right, I think he's a winner. We'll make sure that before we hit the top of the hour that we
Air Canada, Terry, you are awesome. Air Canada. These are all good fantasy schemes, I must say. No, we're gonna give it to Andy. Nope, Andy, you get 2 new models. Congratulations.
In exchange, you have to say nice things about us.
Yeah, exactly. Quit nitpicking stuff. Jesus Christ.
Okay, so before we kind of wind things up here, I want to make sure that you all know we have, for everybody listening today, a 15% discount code. That is 146LUV. If you want the standard edition, that will be at the Jetée Press website. And I believe because of some shipping considerations, this code is good for North American customers only for now. If you're looking for the G-Lux edition, which comes with the DVD, the custom-made USB, and an actual piece of the 146, along with the standard edition book and the clamshell case, that will go to Avgeek TV. So www.avgeektv.com for the G-Lux edition for that discount code. Those of you in the UK who are looking to get this book, we'll put the links in our social media posts because this one's going to be a little bit of a cumbersome one for me to say, but it is basically the Airline Boutique is where our European customers can get the book. If I have screwed up any of that, guys, please correct me on that one, but I think it's accurate.
Yeah, I'll actually post it right now, the other one for you guys.
Okay.
So
But please, Airline Boutique for European and British customers. Charles Kennedy will set you up.
Yep.
So that's a 15%. 15 is the discount on that book. And keep in mind that I've said this on our social media feed that we want this. This is a book that we want you to feel absolutely comfortable about acquiring. And we don't make cheap books. This is not a cheap book, but this book is going to be well worth it. The layout, the presentation, whether you get the standard edition or the G-Lux edition, this will be a book that is too nice to keep on the shelf. Now, I'm going to paraphrase Tom here from our July 31st broadcast, where he said that these are books that your wife will not be embarrassed about you leaving out on the table when guests come over who do not give a shit about aviation. These are beautiful books. Some of my own friends who are not even aviation people have gotten this book, and they've been very impressed. So I would definitely encourage you all to get this book.
It's also the babysitter. My 4-year-old stole it off of my desk after I was done reading it, and he takes it to his room and goes and watches and looks at it every night. So
Brian's got some expensive hobbies to pay for, so let's do what we can to support his hobby. Brian, why don't you spin your camera around and show everybody what we're talking about there?
I was trying to show the book in relation to, I got my large scale. This is 25th scale 146. The 146 is up on that shelf right there.
It's crazy.
Man, you are so lucky that committal laws in Washington State are so lax. You are so lucky.
All right, so what I would like to do is we're going to wind it up here, but let's have everybody make some closing remarks. Let me hand it off to Brian and then to Jeff, and then we'll have Tom close the show out. Personally, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in. This is something that we really had a lot of fun preparing. Actually, it's kind of a miracle we got any preparation done, considering the kind of conversations that have gone on the last several days amongst us. So thank you all for tuning in. Let me hand it over to Brian so he can have his closing remarks. Brian, then you hand it off to Jeff, and then Jeff, you'll close out with Tom and his closing remarks.
Thanks. No, so everybody who joined today that actually wanted to listen to me go blah, 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 thank you so much. I'm not used to this. So having said that, even if you don't like the 146, I think that you would be hard-pressed to put the book down because, like I said at the beginning, I didn't do it as a boring history technical manual. It reads like a document, like you'd watch an interesting documentary. You might watch a documentary about something that maybe you're not that interested in, but the documentary kind of hooks your attention and you become fascinated with it. It's the same thing with this book and the same thing with the subject. And I know that the other upcoming books from La Jetée Press are going to be following that same methodology as well. So give it a whirl. I think you'll be happy, and thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Jeff?
Well, I'm so grateful to be friends with you guys, and also have had this last hour to talk about the 146, BA 146, BA 146, as we sometimes call it. But no, look, as you know, with Avgeekery's mission to spread the love of aviation, and we. There's so many interesting stories that we've talked about that people don't know about. There's also so many stories still waiting to be told. So I hope this is the beginning of many of us all getting together to talk. Grateful to the audience, everyone join us and give us feedback. Let us know how we can can make this experience better for you. If there's certain topics you want to talk about, we'll totally geek out on almost any aviation topic you want. So, but in any case, thanks again for joining us. And I'm going to hand it over to Tom.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks everybody for taking the time to come out. We had a really good turnout on this episode, if you will, and that's really encouraging. And I think most of us, we're not a part of this venture for money. We're a part of this for community. It really is been amazing, the community we've made over the last 25 years. And it's really great to know that there's some really nice people that you can just talk about airplanes with. The other thing I want to bring up is, if you know somebody in the aviation industry that would like to be a guest on our show, so to speak, shoot us an email. If we can make it happen, we'll make it happen. We would love to come across somebody, a test pilot for one company, or somebody who was an engineer and has some, inside dope on an interesting program. So feel free, if you know somebody, let us help us get in touch with them. Anyways, thanks so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Take care. See you, everyone.
Bye now.